My name's Martyn Bush. We farm here with my wife Maree on this property which is called Birchwood. It's 295 hectares, 25 k's west of Ashburton. We're about 600 metres above sea level, and as the crow flies, we're probably about 15 k's from Mount Peel, which is further to the west. Fairly typical plains property. We have border dike irrigation, part of a major irrigation scheme. The land use around here has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, obviously heading towards the dairy industry. This property here is a mixed farm. We are a breeding and finishing operation, as well as grow arable crops, wheat and barley, after our green feeds. We grow the green feeds for the dairy industry. We winter cows, about 500 cows this winter, 200 heifers. We have 1,000 ewes plus replacements, and we also have 400 deer, 200 breeding hinds and their progeny, which we finish. My father before me, he came here in the late 50s. He was part of a much bigger property, farmed by his uncle and aunt. And in the early 60s he took over. This particular block we're standing on, it had virtually no shelter on it at all, and he saw the importance of shelter from an early stage. He experienced the 45 wind damage. He was staying here while he was at school, and he realised that you couldn't grow shelter here and let it keep on growing tall. His view was that he needed, if he wanted to farm sheep here, he needed for animal welfare. He needed to grow good lambing shelter, and shelter that he could use for pre-lamb shearing. He was an advocate of pre-lamb shearing, and it's very important to have good shelter for ewes at that time of year. And probably this was fairly typical of what he started with. Pinus radiata with Arizonicas. It was a dryland farm at that point, and they needed to be able to survive some of the harsh droughts that they experienced in the 60s and 70s, and most of them, and they stood up to the droughts pretty well. We have these pylons here to contend with, so that sort of helps probably saves the shelter on this particular property from the advancement of the centre pivot irrigation systems, which is a very efficient form of irrigation, but this particular property doesn't lend itself well to the centre pivot because of these pylons. The shelter behind me, this is a particularly well sheltered paddock. We've grown shelter across the northwest for northwest-southwest protection, but we've also grown westerly shelter for the odd snow fall we get. We tend to get snow out of the west here, and this particular shelter behind me is Arizonica in the front with Oregon's or Douglas fir in the back, and that was one example of when that proved particularly useful was in the '92 snow, when we had about 3 feet to 4 feet of snow in blizzard conditions over a period of 3 days. We put 2,000 ewes in that shelter, and every sheep walked out, and they were pre-lamb shorn. They'd been off the shears about 5 weeks, and everyone survived. Our shelter gets trimmed every 2 years, and it basically gets done. The side pruning starts probably in about year 5, and from then on we just try and keep the branches back and off in the inside of the fence. Predominantly we just side prune. The original hedges we still top, but mostly it's just side pruning now. We were allowing some of our deciduous to grow naturally, but we soon found that we were getting snow damage and wind damage and large limbs dropping on over fences, so we've now side pruned everything. There's two schools of thought regarding cleaning up tree trimmings, and one's to have the fence wide enough so that the trimmings fall inside the shelter, and we've got examples of that here, and that works fine, but the prunings do tend to build up over a period of time. A lot of our shelter we let the prunings fall outside the fence, and then it's a very easy job just to push them up with a front end loader. You virtually don't have to get off the tractor, you just push them all up into a heap, and doesn't take long at all. This shelter here is a good example of low maintenance shelter. It's one of my favourites. We've got Lombardies along the back on the western side, and cedars, deodars on the front here, and they are quite compatible. It's a nice porous shelter. We've got good close-in shelter for lambing. My father was a member of farm forestry probably from the 70s onwards, and I joined up later on, probably in the 90s. And the benefits I get from being a member, we hold field days 3 times a year in the area, and we get a good look around some properties that have got some very nice shelter, and we do learn by example really, and that's the best way, is to go out and have a look at what other people are doing. We've picked up a lot of good information from these field days, and from the newsletters that we get from National Office, and the Tree Grower magazines, particularly good magazine. While trees have benefited this property from the point of view of stock welfare, and that's an ongoing issue with particularly with markets as much as anything. We've got to prove that we have good welfare policies for our production livestock, and that's always been one of our main reasons for growing shelter. It's aesthetically attractive. The properties, we get lots of positive feedback from the travelling public as they pass here. Advice to young people coming onto the land in this area now is to grow something that's going to be able to fit into the environment that you want to farm. If it involves modern irrigation systems with overhead and lateral and centre pivot irrigators, you're obviously going to have to plan for boundaries. Tall shelter can be grown around the boundaries of these irrigators, and there's heaps of scope for close planting, and it's essential for ongoing welfare issues. And if we want to grow food for the world, well, we've got to prove that we can grow it sustainably. So I think trees will still play a vital role in the plains.